It was about making it a community-wide effort and not being about one person or one organization. And it's kind of shaken up the structure of Cleveland because Clevelanders are not used to that. And most community people are not used to that. Most people are used to a small group of people go into a room, they come up with a plan, they present it to the community and say, hey, this is what we're doing. If you don't like it, too bad. If you like it, great. This is what we're doing anyway. And it never really gets traction because it doesn't have the buy-in.
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside. Hello, and welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Jay Klaus, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Mr. Eric. Your microphone is on mute himself. Cornon. Yep, your microphone's still on mute.
Oh, are you kidding me? It's so hard remembering whether or not your microphone is on mute or not. There should be a little thing on Skype that tells me microphone's on mute. Like, you know, when your caps lock's on, when you're going to type in your password on your computer and it says caps lock's on. Why does it not have that for microphone on mute?
I want to be on your side here, but we do this so often now that I think there's no longer an excuse for you to not check before you speak.
I think my excuse is just being me. I'm gonna own this. It's who I am now. It's my nickname. You know, it gives the interviewee a little pause. That's what it is. A little chuckle to collect their thoughts and think.
Yeah, to the listeners here, during our post-production process, I'm pretty sure that our post-production wizard, Nathan, edits out at least once in every episode me saying, Eric, you're on mute, because I see him speaking in the video, but there's no audio coming through, at least once per episode.
I just have such deep breathing, I have to be on mute, you know? Otherwise, you would just hear in the background, and no one wants that.
Or we'd hear Hank.
You'd hear Hank barking, yeah.
Does the new pop filter cover up the red flashing light on the front of your microphone?
It does, I think, which is why the problem has gotten worse. So I got a new microphone, and the mute button works great. Whereas my old microphone, the mute button worked about 50% of the time, which was the problem. But now I have a pop filter, and it has a red outside, and I can't see through the pop filter to see the red button. So it's really just, you know, muting, maybe it's just not for me.
I struggle with the false unmutes myself because I have the old model of the microphone that you replaced.
So you do the double click, the triple click, the hit it click. It's a process.
Yeah. These are the behind the scenes problems of podcasting, folks.
And we're going to get to go behind the scenes somewhere else today.
That's right. Today we're talking to Bernie Moreno of the Bernie Moreno Companies. Bernie has over 20 years in the retail automotive business. In 2005, he purchased what has become the largest volume Mercedes-Benz dealership in Central Ohio, and since that time, he's added many brands, including Sprinter, Porsche, Infiniti, Aston Martin, Maserati, and Rolls-Royce. He's based in Cleveland, and this past year, he was one of the main drivers of an event called Blockland, a blockchain solutions conference that took place in Cleveland the first week of December. So if you're like us, you're probably hearing that background and that event and kind of saying, what is that connection? And we were in the same spot. We were very interested to hear about it, especially given that, from what I understand, this thing was pulled off in about 6 months of preparation time.
Yeah. One of the things we do here on Upside is we look at cities and how they're developing. And a lot of times that is a 10, 20-year plan. This is the complete opposite of that. This is, I have an idea to make this city relevant. Let's do it now. And we're going to get into it in the interview, but I just think it's so audacious. We had to have him on.
Totally. And as we've talked to Todd Fetterman of North Coast Angel Fund with Cleveland, there's definitely some embedded attitude, culture in the community there, which, Eric, you have a unique view into as a native Clevelander, and I have a unique view into as someone who has to talk to you every week. So I thought it would be really enlightening to hear how somebody goes in from what seems like an outsider's perspective and creates buy-in with a whole community to pull off a pretty large-scale, very relevant conference in such a short period of time.
You know, you don't have to talk to me every week, right? Like, we can cut this. We could just end it right now. Or you can talk to me after this interview.
Listen, I don't do it for you. I don't do it for me. I do it for the people.
If you're doing it for the people, then let's jump into this interview with Bernie, and then you and I can have to talk to each other afterwards. Ready?
If you guys have any thoughts on this interview as we go through, you can tweet at us at UpsideFM or email us hello@upside.fm, and we'll get into this interview here with Bernie. Hey guys,
Wanted to cut in here real quick and let you know about something Jay and I have been getting ready behind the scenes in 2019. When we started this podcast, Jay and I said that you, the listener, would have an opportunity to learn in real time, to think like venture investors with us as we meet a wide variety of personalities and examine a wide range of industries. Well, now we're going to share something new, and it's a little different. This new idea is called The Update. It's a carefully curated quarterly publication of editorials, trends, and stories happening outside of Silicon Valley. Jay and I will be writing stories about what we're learning about on the podcast, have guest editorials on interesting topics, and share news and updates from our podcasts. In some cases, we may even share some exclusive content or first looks. Our goal is to stay at the cutting edge, and of course, bring you along with us. We're super excited about it and know you're going to love it. If you want to be the first to hear about our Q1 launch and subsequent letters, go to upside.fm/update to get on the mailing list.
Bernie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's awesome having you here. On Upside, we like to start with a history of the guest. So can you tell us about the history of Bernie?
Oh boy, where do you want to start? Now, I'll give you the quick rundown. So I was born in Colombia, South America, moved to the U.S. when I was 5. Always loved cars, always wanted to be in the car business. So I ended up deciding to go to the University of Michigan because I had in my mind that I was going to be the chairman of the board of General Motors, and went to work at Saturn, actually Automobile Magazine, my freshman year as a gopher during school. And then during the summers, I got a job as an intern at Saturn Corporate and worked for there during the summers between my sophomore, junior year. And then when I graduated, went to work for them full time. I worked for Saturn Corporate in Michigan, then Tennessee for 3 years after I graduated from college. And then out of the blue, I met a car dealer from Boston who hired me to run one of his car dealerships, despite the fact that I'd never worked in a car dealership before. Ran his Saturn dealership in Rhode Island for 3 years, and then moved up to Boston for him and ran a few of his luxury dealerships, Mercedes, Porsche, BMW, etc. Did that for another 9 years. And then again, out of the blue, about 14 years ago, Mercedes-Benz called me and told me they had a really crappy Mercedes dealership in Cleveland they wanted me to buy. And I said, wow, it sounds perfect. So I came to Cleveland 14 years ago, bought one Mercedes dealership, grew that to 21 dealerships in 4 states. And then about 2 years ago, decided to sell all but 4 of my dealerships. 3 that my original one in Cleveland, 2 other ones here, and then 1 in Miami. I'm going to keep those for a while. And then decided to have a smaller focus on the car business, like I just mentioned, and then moved into technology, specifically looked at blockchain for the last 2 or 3 years as a way to develop technology solutions, primarily for governments. So that's me in 90 seconds.
I like that. Can you take me back to as a kid in Colombia? What was it about cars that stuck out to you?
Well, I wasn't so much in Colombia because I was 5 when I moved here, but my dad was the equivalent of the Secretary of Health in Colombia, and when he moved to the U.S., he was 40. He had to become an intern at a hospital in Miami doing rounds in the middle of the night. So he went from a very privileged lifestyle to kind of, working class guy. As he built up his career, he would kind of measure how well he was doing depending on what kind of car he was driving. And so maybe my joy of cars comes from seeing my dad be so happy about getting a new car. When he finally got a Mercedes, it was kind of like the ultimate sign that he had made it in America.
Yeah, what was your perception growing up in South America? Talk to me about your evolution of understanding what, North America and the United States was.
Well, I joke that when I came to the U.S., this is 1971, South Florida. And so when I moved here, there was a lot of people that my mom made me promise that we would, and all my siblings, that we would have to figure out the meaning of a word before we asked her. We had to look it up in a dictionary. We had to work on it. And so that worked pretty well. But there was one word that I kept hearing over and over again, which was spick. I didn't know what it meant. I couldn't look it up in a dictionary. It was completely out of context. So when I asked my mom what it meant, she said it was an acronym that stood for Smart People in Colombia.
Amazing. That's such an amazing story.
How long were you in Southern Florida for? 71 to what year?
To 85. So I went to kindergarten through senior year in high school there.
So that's like prime cocaine cowboys territory, right? In Miami?
Yeah. That was the full drug. Actually, when I was there from 71 to 85, it was mostly marijuana coming from Colombia. But after I left there, it kind of shifted to coke, with the Pablo Escobar era. But that was kind of after I left.
Okay.
Wild. So you come to America and you had this vision of running GM for a little bit because you're into cars and you start with Saturn dealerships. Talk to me about when you first got into cars and being a part of those companies. Did it live up to your expectations?
Oh yeah, I mean, I loved working for Saturn. It was amazing. Saturn was basically, it was like a master's degree in business because it was more like a college campus in a corporate environment, because we looked at everything from a clean sheet of paper, what's the right way to do something rather than what's been done previously. So it was a great experience working for Saturn. At the end, though, General Motors swallowed it back up. It was spawned from GM as this innovative new thing, but the GM culture just couldn't stand the fact that this innovative little company was doing such amazing things, and so it sucked it into its mediocrity orbit. And at the end, basically GM, who created Saturn, ultimately ended up killing it the same way they destroyed a lot of what they did.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Saturn created to compete with the Japanese automakers? Wasn't that the whole process, an idea?
Yeah, exactly. It was General Motors' answer to Honda and Toyota. And again, when it first came out, they revolutionized the car business in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of the things that happen today in the car business owe their roots to what Saturn did in the late 80s, early 90s. But again, General Motors just couldn't live with the culture. GM was so negative and so big compared to Saturn that they basically ended up sucking Saturn into its orbit. And when that happened, it just died.
I kind of want to stay on this thread, but jump through time a little bit. Today, we have a new car company that is claiming to be incredibly innovative in Tesla. Do you have any kind of hot takes on Tesla as someone who's been in the car industry for a few decades?
Yeah, I mean, Tesla's an amazing marketing machine. I mean, Elon Musk is the master of marketing. I mean, he truly single-handedly has made the electric car relevant. If not for him, one human, you would not be talking about electric cars the way we're talking about electric cars today. Every car company on earth dismissed electric cars, and he basically put them on the map. Obviously, the company has lost an enormous amount of money over time, and a lot of Tesla is partially its technology, which is good, but mostly it's the aura that he's been able to create around the brand. That's pretty remarkable.
You're saying people aren't talking about Fiskars?
I was a Fisker dealer, so I can assure you we're not talking about Fiskars at all. But, Elon Musk did an amazing job with Tesla. I mean, the guy's one of those people that will not take no for an answer, looks adversity in the eye, and has created a pretty amazing company. I mean, he's done what companies dramatically larger than him had ever failed to do. So he's probably one of the most iconic people in the car business as a result.
Yeah, not a lot of car companies are able to also just send one of their models out into space as a marketing ploy.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, he would probably be, Steve Jobs was to computer devices as maybe Elon Musk is to the car business, in the sense that he also had a lot of other careers. Steve Jobs obviously did Pixar and other things, and Elon Musk with SpaceX and with Tesla has done a pretty amazing job. People have counted him out many times.
You mentioned that the Mercedes company called you and said, quote, "We have a pretty crappy dealership in Cleveland that we want you to buy." I've read that in interviews with you before too. So what was it about, such a bad sounding offer that spoke to you and you said, you know what, I'm going to take you up on that?
Well, I saw potential. So while the dealership may not have been performing well, I believed that the Cleveland market was a good market. The local Lexus dealership was doing very well at the time. It was outselling the Mercedes dealership dramatically more than it should have been. And I saw that as an opportunity. And quite frankly, it was the only Mercedes dealership I could have ever afforded to buy. So it was one of those things where a window of opportunity opened and I jumped through it, and it's worked out really well.
How do you change the culture in that dealership when you first show up? Because it's underperforming. I'm guessing that there are a lot of reasons for that, but what do your first 100 days look like when you buy a new dealership?
It's funny. You have to start immediately building a different environment. And what we talked about was being completely sales driven. We're totally focused on sales. We were client obsessed. We were very community focused, and we built a team culture. I think those are the 4 pillars that made us work. And then it was about bringing the right people together. I was fortunate to have some people that came with me from Boston that could help me put that culture throughout the organization. But fixing that culture was really important. And it goes to, what are your reward mechanisms? What do you cheer about? What do you get upset about? And all of that has to align. And typically what I find is, if you get the client obsession part right and the team part right, everything else kind of happens from there. And we were successful basically on our first month. The dealership had sold 24 cars in 5.5 months before we bought it. We bought it on May 12th of 2005. And from May 12th to May 31st, we sold 80 cars. So we were successful right from the get-go. Certainly part of it was because I had no plan B. I put every dollar that I'd ever seen in my life into this dealership. And if it had failed, I would be working the drive-through window at McDonald's, having to sell a lot of supersizes to feed my lifestyle. And the people who came with me from Boston were kind of in the same boat. And we changed the culture, and we were right. We took that Lexus dealership and devastated their sales and grew this dealership to be the largest seller of luxury automobiles anywhere in the Midwest. Forget just Mercedes, of any brand, anywhere in the Midwest, including Chicago, which is a much bigger city, of course. We outsold every Mercedes dealership in town combined. And there was a lot of Mercedes dealerships in Northeast Ohio, namely 6. So we're just one of 6. But we sell more cars than the other 5 combined. Mercedes has an award that they measure dealerships on a bunch of different factors. It's called the Best of the Best Award. It's given to the top 15% of dealers. It's virtually impossible to get it 2 years in a row. We've gotten it 12 out of 13 years that we were eligible. And again, it's a testament to putting these foundations in place and just working on those things every day.
Jay and I are both members of the Blockland Facebook group and have followed it since its inception. It seems like those pillars that you used in your launching of a new dealership in Cleveland are pretty translatable to what you are trying to bring into Blockland. So I want to kind of take a step back, and for the listeners who aren't familiar with Blockland, can you tell us what Blockland is in your own words?
Yeah. So I mentioned a couple of years ago, decided to wind down the amount of exposure I had in the automotive business down to these 4 dealerships from 21. So sold 17 dealerships. And then it was kind of like, what's next? I landed on blockchain probably 3 or 4 years ago and started thinking about some things that we can do with blockchain. I'm very familiar with the process of car titles and the amount of bureaucracy and paperwork and inefficiency that goes with producing this crazy piece of paper. So I had this idea to put titles on blockchain. And as I put together the team to do that, the CFO, the CTO, the chief architect, your CEO, all these C's, right? Almost all of them looked at me and said, well, where do you want to do this? Meaning that Cleveland wouldn't be the place that you would build a tech startup. And I found that unacceptable because this is where I made my money. This is where I wanted to live, etc. So Blockland was born from the idea that the next entrepreneur would say to himself or herself, Cleveland's a natural place to start a tech company. And so what Blockland really represents is that. How do we make Cleveland a significantly relevant tech city? Using knowledge of blockchain or being really, really good at blockchain is kind of our creed to be able to be part of the larger national tech community and build out an ecosystem for all tech companies in the process. And so we created these nodes, 10 of them, put on the conference, enlisted a huge volunteer army. And it was about making it a community-wide effort and not being about one person or one organization. And it's kind of shaken up the structure of Cleveland because Clevelanders are not used to that. And most community people are not used to that. Most people are used to a small group of people go into a room, they come up with a plan, they present it to the community and say, hey, this is what we're doing. If you don't like it, too bad. If you like it, great. This is what we're doing anyway. And it never really gets traction because it doesn't have the buy-in. So this is about rethinking Cleveland as a tech city instead of maybe a historically manufacturing or healthcare-oriented community, but rather a high-tech center. And so we think we can do that.
When did you start putting Blockland plans into action or concepting the idea?
May of 2018. So about 10 months ago or 9 or 10 months ago. And then from there, just started recruiting people, 20 at first, and now we're up to 1,650 type or so volunteers. The effort, I say this with enormous pride. If you went back in May of 18, maybe 98% of Blockland was my idea. Today, maybe 2% of Blockland is my idea. And I say that with pride because what it really means is that Blockland represents the concept of Blockland, and the way we're doing Blockland is really not about one person, but truly a community-wide effort on how to change Northeast Ohio into a tech city.
And Blockland itself ran the first week of December of 18.
Right. Right after Thanksgiving, it was a 4-day conference, super successful. We had to shut down registrations actually because we were oversold. We had about 2,000 people attend, 149 speakers. They were all really amazing. And we had a lot of breakout sessions. We had a startup component. I mean, it was just absolutely fabulous.
I remember thinking when you had announced the date that it was incredibly audacious. And I kind of doubted it a bit. I won't lie that it would be as much of a success as it was, but my brother spoke at it and I just heard from everyone that it was a great success. So I want to kind of dive back into how that kind of came about. You said the volunteers and the community, and I felt that part. But I also saw articles about you meeting with kind of some higher up people around the city. So can you kind of take us behind the scenes there?
Yeah, with the conference, yeah, it was chaos and mayhem. We put this thing together in 4 months. We had to get the headliners first, right? Because the headliners are really important to get the others. We got Nick Szabo, for example, just through sheer determination. My son, who's 20, watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and there's one really long YouTube video. He flashed his email address up on the screen. So I said, what the heck? And we shot him an email saying, hey, this is what we're doing, Blockland, blah, 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 blah. Would you come to our conference? And I get an email back 2 or 3 days later that says, sure. That's all it said. And I'm like, damn, is this the real Nick Szabo? I don't know. I'm not kidding you. I didn't actually think it was actually, I thought it was possible that it wasn't the real Nick Szabo until the day of the conference when I walked in the green room and I saw him there. I'm like, whew.
As I've organized some larger scale events, but not bigger than Blockland by any means. And a 4 to 5 month lead time is crazy, crazy tight without having this army that you mentioned. So, I would actually love to hear your perspective on what the Cleveland community and culture is like generally for listeners who are not from Ohio or Cleveland.
Yeah, it's an amazing place. It really is. I've lived in, obviously, Columbia. I lived in South Florida. I lived in Michigan, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Boston, now Cleveland. Cleveland's very unique, and it's a very, very tight-knit, small community, although part of a very big city. It's 2.5 million people in the DMA, in the general market. So it's a big place. It's, top 20 city in America. It also has small-town Midwestern feel to it. And people collaborate. When they want to collaborate, which we did for Blockland and for the conference, the magic happens. And that's when Cleveland's at its very best. We have all the amenities of a big city. We have the cost of living of a city that has dramatically less infrastructure and less to offer than most cities our size. I mean, we have world-class orchestra. We have world-class art. We have probably the best theater district outside of New York City. We have an amazing food scene. We have this great lake. So Cleveland has a lot going for it. It's just suffers from, ironically, the same issues as Colombia. Because when people think about Colombia, the first thing you think about is Pablo Escobar, narcos, and cocaine. Although the country has incredible resources. So Cleveland's kind of the same way. It just has an image problem. But when people go to Colombia, or when people come to Cleveland, they come here to Cleveland and they're like, wow. And that's what we saw from the conference, the 2,000 people that attended, especially about, 200 or 300 of them, I think, that came from out of state. Every single person was blown away by Cleveland. I spoke to one person who was from New York City, and she's originally from Eastern Europe. And when she talked about how she had to come to this conference in Cleveland, she almost didn't come because she's like, Cleveland, what am I going to do there? And she loved it, loved it. And I think that's what people find here that's a surprise to them.
What kind of pushback did you get, if any? Well, I'm going to guess that you got some pushback from people around Cleveland when you first started pitching this idea.
Cleveland is doing better with its self-deprecating nature. but it still can't help itself a little bit. I think it comes from being, many, 30, 40, 50 years of being Browns fans where they almost expect to lose. So there's an enormous amount of naysaying and snarkiness that happens sometimes within the Cleveland community. It's dramatically less than it was 14 years ago. And I think the conference, to a large extent, squashed a lot of that. But there are still a lot of people in Cleveland who almost expect not to be successful. So there's the pushback from that. Like, it can't. Why would it be possible for us to be a tech city? We're not a tech city. We can't do it. But the good news is the vast majority of people don't think that way. And in fact, typically it's the people who moved to Cleveland that are much more aggressive about pushing Cleveland forward than the people who've lived here their whole lives. But that's changing quite a bit. And I think now it's an environment where people think that we can do this and we will do this. And we've seen that kind of esprit de corps in the community really happen, which I'm really, really, really excited about.
I love the story about getting the email address from the YouTube video. One of my biggest core beliefs is that access is often easier than you think it is. And that's just a perfect example of that. But I would love to hear some more very tactical examples of once you had this idea and you started running with it, what were the first 3 to 5 steps that you took? Because there are a lot of people out there listening to this who probably have a movement of their own they would love to start and don't know how to actually get buy-in from people.
Yeah, I mean, so I started with the idea in May, got the other people. I said, hey, who are people who are like-minded, who are doers, who are action-oriented, and who are smarter than I am? So I got together those 20 people, pitched them on the concept, and they liked it, embraced it. And I said, well, why don't we meet again, bring a bigger group of people? We did. And then from there, it just got a lot of traction. I think the key was making this mission simple, keeping the message clear and crisp the entire time. And then the conference was really, really important because, as I always say, the world needs a deadline. And so saying, hey, we're going to do this conference on December 3rd, whatever day it was, and that becomes everything has to be completed by then, you now have a rallying cry. Because if you don't have that deadline, it's hard to get people aligned to get things done. And it was really one of those things where we knew we had to do it. I mean, once we announced the conference, and I said this to people many, many times, had Blockland Solutions been a failure, I would have done more damage to Cleveland's tech future than good. Because people would have said, see, we can't do it. The naysayers would have won. The dark forces in the community who kind of cheer for failure would have won. But the fact that it was an unequivocal success isn't because of anything I did. It was because of the way everybody came together to make that happen. And it did a lot to squash those naysayers. So it was about assembling the right people with you, putting a correct deadline, painting the right vision, and then just being dogged about execution and not letting anything or anyone tell you that it can't happen. Because if you do, and that's, by the way, similar to what you do in any tech startup, because if you listen to naysayers, the naysayers don't think anything can be done. And it was the same way when I opened this dealership in 2005. When I bought the dealership, literally the day we closed the deal, and the people who sold it to me were leaving, the guy who ran the place, who ironically owns the Nissan dealership next door now, opened the door, left, came back in and said, hey, good luck with doing nothing all day. Because in his mind, this dealership was a failure. And because he thought that, it was. So it's just frame of mind is so important.
Coming from the auto background and moving into tech, how did you know who were the right people to surround yourself with? And how did you, shift into what I kind of see as a very different place in pretty quick time?
Yeah, so with technology, the Blockland effort helped a lot because it made a lot of connections for me. We've been able to build an all-star team so far with our tech company. We're obviously very bullish about that. It's just always being on the lookout for talent. You never know where you'll find it. Randy Cole is a good example. He's our chief strategy officer. He ran the Ohio Turnpike. I just happened to be at a meeting one day, and I'm seeing this guy talking, and I'm like, this guy is sharp. I mean, he really knows what he's talking about, and got to know him a little bit better. Just a great guy. I knew his term was coming up because there was a new administration coming in. And, hey, listen, when I joined the team, our chief technology officer, the same kind of story. I'm a big believer in always making connections, never burning a bridge, and always realizing that someday in the future, that connection may have value to you.
I want to jump back into the idea of an image problem. One thing that blockchain has an image problem with to some people is this idea of cryptocurrency. The Blockland Solutions Conference was geared towards enterprise and governments. How did Blockland differentiate itself from a traditional cryptocurrency conference, which at the time of Blockland being planned were kind of a big thing? There were a lot of them.
Yeah, we didn't want to be another Me2 crypto conference. I went to Consensus in New York in April of last year. It was a total disaster. It was kind of nonsense, to be honest. I mean, people were talking about just ridiculous ideas that had no basis in fact or reality. But it was going to have some coin that would be issued. That coin would go up in value to $1 billion. I mean, just all this nonsense. And it wasn't really solving any problems. And I'm a big believer in the underlying technology. So we looked at it from how can you use this underlying technology to solve business and government problems? And actually, I'll talk about it now, but I'm really supposed to wait until the Digital Chamber of Commerce meeting in March 6th. But I've come to the conclusion that blockchain as a word, as a technology, is a tainted word, and it's just not a good one to use. So we don't really. I'm going to shift the focus to talking about blockchain, which means 100 different things to 100 different people. If you're talking, and you guys know this, if you're talking to a crypto enthusiast, there's no such thing as a blockchain solution for government and business. It doesn't even make sense. It's a square peg in a round hole because by definition, you have to have mining, proof of work. You have to have decentralization, no control, no authority. Well, how do you factor that into a government solution? And then on the other side, if you're talking to somebody, a business person who's running supply chain or a government running, for example, car titles, well, how am I not going to have a decentralized database with no central authority? This is my damn data, right? So there's this disconnect, and yet blockchain is used loosely to describe all this. So we came up with a new term, Marketing 101. When you have an image problem like that, you rebrand. And so what we talk about in our company, and I want to have it be the standard really for what we're doing, that's our ambition, is to talk about belted solutions. And a belted solution is an acronym that stands for a blockchain encrypted ledger that's executable and distributed, meaning that there's 3 thresholds that you should look at whether the solution makes sense. Do you need blockchain type encryption, meaning do you need a public key, private key situation? Do you need to have people who have access to a ledger but not the full ledger? Do you want it to be military grade type encryption? Is that really necessary? Or will a more standard type encryption system work for you on a centralized database? If the answer is no, blockchain encryption works, and that's important to me, then that's one threshold. Does your ledger need to be executable? Meaning, do you need to have Boolean code built into your ledger that executes commands? Is that an important criteria for you? Sometimes the answer is no. Then you shouldn't use a belted solution. And then finally, do you want, with your permissions, to give your ledger in a distributed way to multiple parties where this trust in the system is important? And if the answer to all 3 of those things are yes, then what we talk about is belted solutions. So, for example, if you're doing car titles, rather than saying, hey, I'm doing car titles on blockchain, we're doing belted car titles. So the car title system is a belted solution. You can do birth certificates can be belted. Death certificates can be belted. So now you can have a belted device. You can have a belted piece of your technology. That's much better, I think, from a perspective of talking about blockchain, which then you start saying, well, what does that have to do with Bitcoin? Well, a belted solution has nothing to do with Bitcoin. Literally nothing to do with Bitcoin. There's no comparison between the two. So we prefer to use the term belted going forward.
Are you the first people using the term belted, or is this a industry term that you're adopting?
No, we created the term, we've copywritten it, and we want it to be something that's widely used, widely adopted. So we want it to be kind of like Kleenex, right? It's just a term that people use for these kinds of solutions. But what's good about it is when you think about belted and you're talking about government and business solutions, it makes people think, what are some things that kind of fit those 3 criteria where there's a lot of friction, a lot of back and forth verifications that have to happen. And then I've literally pitched this to many CIOs who are reluctant to even talk about blockchain. But when you talk to them about belted, they're like, oh, hey, we could do tracking of PC purchases using a belted solution to manage PC lifecycle. And then the light bulb goes off. Hey, we can use it for medical payments. We can use it for this other situation in supply chain. So it's really a way to get people's brains to think about what are some things that you can do to kind of fit those three criteria, rather than blockchain. What is it? You're encrypting one set of data with tying it to the next block. It's distributed. There's no central authority, blah, blah, blah. People, they can't wrap their head around that. So by using the word belted solution, they can really wrap their head around that.
How has the general blockchain community received what is going on in Cleveland?
I'd say mixed. We certainly made a lot of noise with the conference. We've made a lot of noise with the fact that the state of Ohio is the first state to accept cryptocurrency. We've made a lot of outreach to Toronto. We've made a lot of outreach to Tel Aviv, which are two great centers for blockchain technology. The challenge kind of goes back to this belted solutions issue, that you have people who are pure crypto enthusiasts, and then you have people who are trying to figure out how to use the technology that I call belted solutions. So what we want to do with that term is to have people understand that Cleveland is the world capital for belted solutions, and then kind of get our credibility along those lines. But a lot of the noise or activity today still is in the crypto world, because it was the first, big app using blockchain. And it's not to say that I'm opposed to crypto or I don't like it. I think we've encouraged a lot of businesses to use and take cryptocurrency. I'm a big believer that unless cryptocurrency is used and not just invested in, it won't really be legitimate long term. You can't just keep trading it for the sake of trading. It actually has to have utility.
So when I think about world capital of X, I think about a timeline or a period where there were once thousands of small enterprises doing X. So in New York, there were thousands of banks in Manhattan and trading houses. In San Francisco, there are currently thousands of startups just in general technology. In Kansas City, there are hundreds of animal health companies. Like, when I think about world capital of belted solutions, how is Cleveland going to get thousands of belted enterprises?
Because we can create an ecosystem here where we create those technology solutions for companies all over the world. So you can use belted solutions for supply chain, for all kinds of medical applications, for manufacturing, for verification of IP. One of the things that's interesting is if you look at the YouTube counter, if you ever watch a video, it stops at 301, because then that's when YouTube starts to audit whether those views are real or not. That's a great application for a belted solution. I think a belted solution will save Facebook, because if Facebook doesn't implement something like that, it's going to eventually be regulated to death, literally to death. So if Facebook is sharing my data, I make a deal with Facebook that says, I'll let you share my data, but I want something in return. You can use a belted solution around the validation of whether they are or they're not sharing my data, and how I'm getting compensated for that. So I think what I look at is, hundreds of companies, startups that are working on those problems here in Cleveland, much like what happened in Seattle when you put Microsoft, by accident, by the way, because there's no reason Microsoft should have been in Seattle. Bill Gates' mom hadn't insisted on staying in Seattle, maybe it would have ended up in New York. If Bill Gates' dad had insisted that Bill Jr. move home in exchange for getting a loan, maybe Microsoft would be headquartered in New Mexico. But from Microsoft, you spun off a lot of tech, and all of a sudden Seattle's a relevant tech city, and we kind of take for granted that just happened. We can do the same sort of thing here in Cleveland. So
you need one big winner, or is Blockland the movement? I guess it's from a talent perspective is what I'm more curious about.
Yeah, you need a few big winners for sure. I mean, I'm hoping that I can provide one of those with my company, obviously. But you do need a couple big tech exits here that then spin off other ones. You need a big startup culture. And you also need big tech to eventually come in and set up shop here locally. So if for example, Oracle isn't going to just do belted systems, they're going to do everything they do now, right? Same thing with Cisco, Microsoft, et cetera. But if all of them think of it and say, hey, listen, we're going to put all of our belted, if I can get them to adopt that term, projects all in Cleveland, because we can attract a bench of talent that can go there where it's low cost, great tech community, great environment, and we can have access to great talent around this, then they would do that. And I think that's how you create that kind of ecosystem here.
So this is a lot on the successes side. Yesterday, you tweeted that Vodum, which I believe you're an investor in, shut its doors and laid off all of its employees and failed.
Can you explain for the listeners what the Vodum product and business model was?
Vodum was a platform that took voting of all types. So it could be voting, like, for example, we did voting for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for their fan vote, all the way to military absentee vote ballots. So the idea is if you're serving in Afghanistan and there's an election, the cost to the government to get you that ballot, have you fill it out and then get you that ballot back, and then how long that takes so that your ballot may or may not be relevant is crazy. So the idea with Vodum is it stands for Vote Mobile. So that you could take through using belted solution, right? Through using a belted solution, you could send a ballot to somebody's smartphone where they could do the vote. It would be recorded through a belted system, and then you could validate the fact that your vote got counted exactly as you intended to bring transparency, speed, efficiency, and drive costs dramatically down for voting. That's the basic concept.
What is your take on the failures that are going to come with the path to eventual success?
Yeah, I mean, that's also part, it's interesting. That's also part of shifting the culture. You're going to have a lot of failures in technology. That's if you don't, then you just don't have enough companies giving it a shot. Because if the community is going to think that every tech company that starts is going to succeed, you probably don't understand how technology works. And so Vodum's a good example of good idea, but executed poorly in the sense that it grew too fast. All the things that every tech company mistake occurs. Grew too fast, burned through its cash too quickly, was over optimistic about its funding capabilities, and went over its skis. That doesn't mean that the idea is a bad one. It doesn't mean the underlying technology is a bad one. I was joking with a friend this morning who asked me about that. And I said, just because General Motors went bankrupt doesn't mean that car companies are bad ideas, right? It just means that General Motors didn't execute its business very well. How many .coms went bust during the late 90s, early 2000s? How many .coms go bust today? It doesn't mean that people aren't going to use the internet or the underlying technology is bad. My hope is that Pete Martin, I feel badly for him. It's devastating to pour your heart and soul into a startup and see it fail. That's terrible. I feel horrible for the employees. For me, it was an investment of under 5%. It was $500,000, so it hurts. But I'm still able to get to work and feed my family and pay my bills. I feel absolutely horrible for the employees that poured their heart and soul into it, that missed a paycheck, that now have to get a job. It's just how it works. That's the nature of technology. It's the ultimate evolutionary animal. You can't just hit a button and create Facebook. It doesn't work that way.
Do you think that in Cleveland, founders and early employees of companies like this, if they were to spin out and start another company, are more or less likely to get funding because they have a failure on their record?
When we have our culture right, the answer is they're going to be more likely, because nothing is better than failure to teach you the lessons of business that you need to know. Would I invest with Pete again is a question that I would say he learned an enormous amount from this experience, that if done properly, he will be very successful in the future. And you guys know all the cliches. I mean, we could each share 5 stories, at least minimum, of companies that started out as failures that actually ended up to be incredible successes. Many entrepreneurs that were very successful. I mean, we just talked about Steve Jobs, right? There was a lot of failures in his life, but nobody's going to say Steve Jobs was a failure in technology. That's just the way it works. I mean, I would say the message to the employees of Vodum and future employees of future failed companies, failure is what you signed up for when you went into a startup world and technology. And instead of using it as something that nobody's going to care that you feel like crying and sucking your thumb in the corner. The world isn't going to care that you feel that way. So you got to pull yourself up, brush it off, learn from it, and go back into the battle. I mean, that's what you just got to do. That's what winners do.
Bernie, do you consider yourself an active angel investor? Obviously, you invested in that company. Is that something that you're doing fairly regularly at this point?
Yes. So one of the other people that I hired to run my company is Shane Bigelow. He used to run AB Bernstein for the Midwest. And so we've made 13 angel investments. Obviously, one of them didn't work, but we have other ones that did really well. And our expectation is that 20% of them will be home runs, 20% of them will be duds, and the middle ones will be like, eh. And that's just the way it works. So we're doing two things. We're doing angel investing, and we're investing in venture funds, and then also creating our own companies.
You guys are operating fairly independently. You're not under like the North Coast umbrella.
No. I'm self-funding all of my current tech company. There's no point in me bringing in investors right now because any valuation that I would put on the company would be shortchanging it. And I'm still fortunately in a position to be able to self-fund. And so we won't bring investors in until we have significant revenue because then my valuation will be dramatically higher. Why would I pass on value to an investor when I don't need to?
Yeah. So how have you yourself learned the ropes of angel investing to the point where you feel comfortable doing that?
Well, I have really smart people around me. So Shane knows what he's doing. Crazy smart, much smarter than me. You have people like Randy in the operating capacity. And we don't go too far outside our skis. I mean, like I believe that I still believe the Votum business model works. I think it's a great idea. It just the company wasn't executed as well as it should have, clearly, because it failed. But I think it was a sound company when we invested in it. I think the big strategic mistake is he did a big acquisition and just went over his skis. Had he not done that acquisition, I don't think he would have failed. Hopefully that's a lesson he learned. A lesson for me that I learned is if you don't learn every day, there's something wrong with you. And the lesson for me is on these other companies that I have, we're going to be a lot more aggressive about finding out exactly what they're doing on a more regular basis than we were. We were a little too lax with Votum not being on top of what they were doing.
In the Midwest, there's a kind of a bias towards investing in companies that are like B2B SaaS and have traction in terms of immediate revenue. What types of companies are you most interested in? And is that constrained to the Northeast Ohio geography?
Primarily Northeast Ohio, because again, I can't be a hypocrite. I want to build the ecosystem here. That doesn't mean exclusively Northeast Ohio, but primarily in companies that I understand. I'm not going to invest in companies that I just don't know the business. That's not what I choose to do. If there's synergies with other things that I'm already doing. So like one of the companies I'm really excited about is a company called Dryver. And that has perfect natural synergies to my business. The CEO is fantastic, very conservative, very sharp, keeps me very well informed. He's just the perfect type of entrepreneur I like. And again, the business is just very synergistic with what I already do.
All right, one last question then from me, Bernie. This is something that Eric and I ask each other at the end of most of our interviews about the companies we talk to. But I'd love to hear your perspective on what you're looking for from the Cleveland ecosystem or Northeast Ohio generally in the next 6 to 18 months to continue this momentum that you guys have started with Blockland.
Yeah, so we have 5 things that when we're sitting here a year from now, we have 5 things that we want to do. Number 1, we want to pull off another amazing conference, Solutions 2. We want to have a series of events between now and the conference to kind of build up that momentum that are worthwhile, that are substantive, and that it causes people, especially young professionals, to create a tech community so people get to know each other. That's really, really important. Again, it goes back to this philosophy I shared with you, the idea that these connections, no matter how slight you may think they are, will pay dividends in the future. So this idea of a conference with events and communities, goal number 1. Goal number 2 is we want to recruit a big tech company to Cleveland. We want to have either Google or Microsoft or Amazon open an office in Cleveland, not obviously a headquarters, but an office in Cleveland. We think there's a lot of attraction to doing that. We think that Google would be a natural organization. They already have a lot of Googlers, so-called, that exist within a 1-hour drive of here. So for them to consolidate them in one office in Cleveland, we want to have that done this year. We want to create a startup package that manages talent and concierge for startups. So if you're doing a tech startup, you can go to one centralized place that kind of guides you for everything that you may need. We want to create funding mechanisms for pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B. Create a funding mechanism in town that if you're in need of funding, that you have a variety of sources to go to. And finally, we want to create the world's largest technology center. We call it City Block, that would have a school attached to it. And we want to have that up and running and a place that people can see, visit, and spend some time in when they come to Cleveland. So those are the 5 things that when we do those, we'll give each other a pat on the back at the end of the year.
Awesome. Well, that almost warrants a follow-on interview a year from now to hear how all those things are going. After the show, if people want to learn more about you or about Blockland, where would you send them to?
Yeah, for sure. The Blockland Cleveland Facebook page is where to go. That's where you have a great community. I mean, you guys are part of it. You see it. People are very passionate about what they post on there. It has a dual role. Again, building the community, education, sharing of articles. It's just a great place to interact with like-minded people.
You know, Eric, when I was growing up, I did not have cable.
You didn't have cable? Why not?
Literally had only your basic channels, the Fox, the CBS, the NBC. My parents just didn't believe in giving that to me. And so one of the biggest changes in my life was getting cable and then Netflix. Netflix really changed the game.
Are we supposed to have a pity party for younger Jay here, or is this, where are we going?
Most of this podcast is built to give Jay a pity party, but not right now. What I'm talking about is the idea of being able to binge television and the fact that Netflix brought that to the surface, and now podcasts are doing the same. And that's what Nick Oberhaus said on his iTunes review, Binge-worthy. I listened to a handful of entrepreneurial-focused podcasts, and up until this point, I've been consistently jumping around from podcast to podcast in search of good content. In comparison, I just realized that I've listened to 14 consecutive Upside podcasts since finding the show.
Man, that's a heck of a review. That sounds like something that I'd want to read live on our Upside podcast.
That sounds like something that I like to read every morning when I wake up.
Wow, look at us waking up, reading great podcast reviews. If you're a listener and you want to leave a great podcast review, maybe 5 stars, throw a review up on Apple, and we might read your podcast review live here. All right, Jay, we just spoke with Bernie Moreno. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about Blockland, which is kind of the purpose of this episode. We also talked about him as an angel investor, some of his thoughts about Cleveland, some of his background as a car guy. Where do you want to start? What were your big takeaways?
I enjoyed the little gifts that I was not expecting as part of this interview. I was not expecting to talk about Ownum. I was not expecting to talk to him as an angel investor. Those were fun little asides that I got to pull out of that. This was an interesting interview to me because, as we said in the intro, this is somebody who's coming at this from what seems like an outsider perspective, but is playing in a lot of the same spaces that you and I play in, but still has mostly an outsider's perspective into those different places. So I enjoyed that aspect of this interview. And, you know, I'm impressed, and I was impressed before the interview that this thing was pulled off, and that he bringing the idea forward, his humility in saying, you know, at the beginning, this is probably 90% my idea, but at this point, Blockland is like 2% me because I surround myself with smart, connected people. That's the type of humility and attitude that you need to pull off such a large-scale event that leverages what I assume to be dozens, if not hundreds, of volunteers. It's
kind of amazing because every headline that was in every paper about this Blockland initiative was Bernie Moreno, car guy, is going to put on this blockchain conference. And he had to overcome that. And I think one of the ways he did it was with surrounding himself with all these people. And he made a comment once in the Facebook group that someone said, you know, I got tired of running into the wall. And they were talking about their history of being a venture investor in Cleveland and feeling like nothing was ever getting done. And Bernie responded to that and said, don't worry, I have a really hard head. And I love that idea that he's just willing to like run through the wall for this idea. And he'll fly people to Toronto to learn about what's going on there and meet with people from Tel Aviv and think about accelerators and recruit Google. Like, that is just the kind of audacity that I guess maybe Silicon Valley is like famous for. And he's bringing a little bit of that flavor and that ambition to Cleveland.
I think it's a little bit of the type of audacity and attitude that artists and creators have to have in general. There's a book I just added to my reading list that I haven't read yet, but I love the concept of it just from the title, which is The Courage to be Disliked. And I think you have to have some level of that to actually make significant progress and make things. You know, hot take from me from an hour of talking to Bernie, I'm going to guess that he's not the most politically correct or concerned with being the most politically correct guy, but he's ultimately trying to make things happen. And like you said, I have a hard head. He was going to make things happen. I think you need those types of people in an ecosystem, especially in an ecosystem where there seems to be these naysayers and detractors that he mentioned too.
I love that you reference books that you haven't read yet. That's my favorite thing about you.
The problem is I buy a lot of books, I collect a lot of books, I put them on a shelf, and I never read them, but they make me look intelligent.
That's true, and you have a very nice shelf that sits right behind where you usually record, not where you're recording right now. So it looks like you're very intellectual.
That's right.
One of the things that I really liked about this interview is this is the first time on Upside that I felt like I knew something about the company that I couldn't find online or the guest or whoever before the interview. Like I've been involved with the Blockland Facebook group. I think he said it started with 20 people. I think I was like invite number like 60 or something. And now it's 1,600 people. So I've seen this idea develop over time. I've called into some of the meetings. I've seen the pitch decks. I've seen everything kind of get created. I haven't had the most active role in it, mostly because I was moving from New York to Cincinnati and I have a job and this, and it's kind of tough to put more stuff on your plate. But I was a supporter and I was active in the community and I'm actively commenting and sharing. My brother, as I mentioned, actually spoke at the Blockland conference on InsurTech. So it was just really cool because I know that you've had this experience with some of the companies from Columbus. It was really cool getting to dive deeper into things that I already knew as contrasted with learning things for the first time here on the podcast.
So you mentioned that your brother spoke at the conference. When the conference was happening, I was literally not speaking. I was meditating on that trip at this time. So I missed all of the actual during period of Blockland. I was in the Facebook group at the time. I called into a couple of calls at one point, but I didn't have any sense of how it went. So, from your observer's perspective, how did it go?
From everything I saw, it looked like it went awesome. My dad went to go see my brother speak. My dad spoke incredibly highly of the conference and everyone who was there and walking around. Social media looked like there were a ton of people there. The keynotes were large names. The side rooms were great topics. I think that overall it was just a very impressive conference. And one thing that I don't think Bernie mentioned is that Cleveland got behind it. I think that the Cleveland tourism group, I forget their name, but they're the ones who make the Cleveland signs in Cleveland, if you've ever seen them.
Jobs Ohio got behind it.
Jobs Ohio got behind it. I know that we talked to some people down at Cincy Tech who shared it around with their community and with Centrifuge. I'm sure the same thing happened in Columbus. So it seemed like people in Ohio know about it, even if they didn't go. So I think the word definitely got out. I mean, it's sold out. So what more can you want?
Looking at the website and gleaning what I can about the event, I was able to compare it to my organizing experiences with Startup Week in particular, which is a huge bear of an event to put on. And this seemed bigger, and they did it in about the same amount of time, maybe less. But for the first year doing something, even if you have experienced organizers on your team who have organized events before, the first year you're doing any one particular event is really, really tough. You don't know exactly what it's going to look like or what the protocol or processes need to be. So the community must have really delegated and put a ton of manpower into this thing to pull it off to the level that they did, which, is just really, really impressive to me.
And it's only one of the pillars of the Blockland movement, which is such a bigger idea. It's this idea that Cleveland is going to become a tech center with a focus on this, what he's calling belted solutions. What do you think about this idea of creating a tech terminology and owning it?
I'm a big fan, and it wasn't owning it for the sake of directly monetizing it. He did make the tie-in to Kleenex, but I love the idea of taking a term that is not being received the way you want it to, making a more accurate new term that you can kind of coin. I mean, it's part of branding, it's part of marketing. I talk to people who operate freelance and tech businesses all the time about this. So I do really like that. It's unfortunate that it's in the same relative space where ICOs were retermed into something else, and people are saying that's still the same thing. Stop trying to just put a new term on it.
Yeah. I just love the idea that you can play off the Rust Belt idea.
I was thinking that too. I was like, yes,
Okay.
the Rust Belt.
Yeah. All right, Jay. Well, this was a fun one. If people want to interact with us about this episode, where should they go?
We'd love to hear your feedback, guys. You can tweet at us at UpsideFM, or you can email us hello@upside.fm. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on iTunes or send it to a friend. Otherwise, we'll talk to you next week. That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's guest, so shoot us an email at hello@upside.fm or find us on Twitter at UpsideFM. We'll be back here next week at the same time talking to another founder in our quest to find upside outside of Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Eric and I decided there were a couple things we wanted to share with you at the end of the podcast, and so here we go. Eric Hornung and Jay Klaus are the founding parties of the Upside Podcast. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interest in the companies which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinions of Duff & Phelps LLC and its affiliates, Unreal Collective LLC and its affiliates, or any entity which employ us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Never mind, bro, that can't be matched. I'm lighting it on fire, used to run victory laps, and still I'm not even tired. It's all about the timing, yeah, that's what they say. Well, I'ma keep on rhyming, find a way.